They handed her divorce papers at Christmas dinner, right there, in front of her 8-year-old twin daughters,
Look, Mommy,
in
that's
front of the mother-in-law,
Oh,
who
that's
had always
perfect right
hated
there.
her, in front of the woman who had been sleeping with her husband for 2 years. They laughed. They actually laughed. They offered her $50,000 to disappear, to give up her children, to walk away from 8 years of marriage like it meant nothing. They thought she was nobody, a librarian's daughter from Ohio with no money, no connections, and no way to fight back. They were wrong. Because what they did not know, what nobody knew,
This
was
is
that
the
Emma's
best
dead
Christmas
father
Eve
had left her
ever.
something. A voicemail she had been too heartbroken to listen to for 2 years. A voicemail that contained a secret so devastating it would destroy the Hartwell family forever. One phone call, one recording. That was all it took to turn their perfect Christmas into a nightmare they would never wake up from. This is the story of how a mother with nothing became the woman who took everything. How the family who tried to erase her ended up erasing themselves. And trust me, the ending is not what you expect. Value statement and lesson. Before we begin, here's what this story will teach you. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose, because when you take everything from someone, you also take away their fear. And a person without fear is the most dangerous enemy you will ever face. This story is about betrayal, revenge, and justice. But more than that, it is about the power we discover in ourselves when the world tries to break us. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or thrown away by people who thought you did not matter, this story is for you. They thought she was nobody. For 8 years, Emma Collins had supported her husband through law school, sacrificed her career to raise their twin daughters, and endured the cold disdain of a mother-in-law who treated her like a stain on the family name. But this Christmas, the Hartwell family went too far. In the middle of a holiday dinner, with snow falling gently outside and her 8-year-old daughters watching from across the table, they did not just hand her a gift. They handed her divorce papers and a custody demand that would take her children away forever. They laughed, thinking they had discarded a broken woman with nothing left to fight with. They did not know about the voicemail sitting in her phone, a message from her dead father that she had been too heartbroken to listen to for 2 years. One phone call to her voicemail, one recording. That was all it took to turn their perfect Christmas into a nightmare they would never wake up from. This is the story of how the woman they tried to erase became the one who erased them. The morning of December 24th started with the smell of cinnamon and the sound of her daughters arguing over tinsel. Emma stood in the kitchen of their modest 3-bedroom house in Westbrook, Connecticut, watching Lily and Rose decorate the small Christmas tree by the window. At 8 years old, the twins were identical in appearance, but opposite in personality. Lily was meticulous, placing each ornament with surgical precision. Rose threw tinsel like confetti and called it art. "You are doing it wrong," Lily announced, adjusting an ornament her sister had just placed. "The angel goes at the top, not the middle." "It is not wrong," Rose shot back. "It is creative. Mom, tell her my way is valid." Emma smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "Both ways are beautiful, girls. Christmas decorations do not have rules." "Grandma Margaret says there are rules for everything," Lily said quietly. "She says presentation matters." The smile faded from Emma's face. She turned back to the counter, where she had been arranging cookies on a plate, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Grandma Margaret," she thought, "says a lot of things." 8 years. She had been married to David Hartwell for 8 years, and in all that time, his mother had never once called her by her first name without making it sound like an insult. Emma was always that girl, or your wife, or simply her, spoken with the same tone one might use to describe an unpleasant smell. But today was Christmas Eve. Today, David had promised things would be different. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her best friend, Rosa Martinez. "You documenting everything like I told you?" Emma sighed and typed back, "It is Christmas, Rosa. I am not going to spend the holiday being paranoid." The response came immediately. "Paranoid is what smart women call prepared. Screenshots are free. Therapy is expensive. Text me if Margaret starts anything. I will be there in 20 minutes, with bail money and a baseball bat." Emma laughed, despite herself. Rosa had been through her own brutal divorce 3 years ago and had emerged from it with a dark sense of humor and an encyclopedic knowledge of family court strategy. She was the friend who showed up with wine and legal advice in equal measure. "Mom," Rose called out, "is Daddy coming home before we go to Grandma's house?" Emma checked the time. It was already 2 in the afternoon, and David had left for the office at 7 that morning. On Christmas Eve, for an emergency meeting that could not wait. "He will meet us there, sweetheart," Emma said, keeping her voice light. "You know how busy Daddy is with work." "He is always busy," Lily said, and there was something in her voice that made Emma's heart crack just a little. She knelt down beside her daughters and pulled them both into a hug. "I know it is hard when Daddy works so much, but he loves you both very much. And tonight, we are going to have a beautiful Christmas dinner. And tomorrow morning, there will be presents, and everything is going to be wonderful." She believed it when she said it. That was the worst part. She actually believed that this Christmas would be the turning point. That David's distance lately was just work stress. That the late nights and the locked phone and the way he flinched when she touched him were all just symptoms of a difficult case. She had no idea that in 6 hours, her entire world would collapse. The Hartwell house was not a mansion, but it wanted to be one. It was a large colonial revival in the wealthy part of town, with white columns and a circular driveway and the kind of immaculate landscaping that screamed old money, even though Margaret's wealth was barely 20 years old. Emma pulled her Honda Civic up behind David's BMW and felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. The girls were already unbuckling their seatbelts, excited to see the massive Christmas tree that Margaret decorated every year with ornaments that cost more than Emma's monthly grocery budget. "Remember your manners," Emma said automatically. "Say please and thank you. Do not run in the house, and do not touch anything in Grandma's sitting room." "We know, Mom," both girls said in unison. The front door opened before they reached the porch. Margaret Hartwell stood in the doorway wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and pearl earrings, her silver hair styled in a perfect bob that probably cost $200 to maintain. She was 65 years old and looked 50, thanks to what Emma suspected was a very skilled plastic surgeon. "There are my granddaughters," Margaret said, her voice warming by several degrees as the twins rushed to hug her. "Merry Christmas, my darlings. Go inside and see the tree. There are special ornaments for you to hang this year." The girls squealed and disappeared into the house. Margaret's smile cooled as she turned to Emma. "You are wearing that?" Emma looked down at her red sweater dress. It was the nicest thing she owned, bought on sale 2 years ago for David's office Christmas party. "Merry Christmas to you too, Margaret." The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, come in then. David is in the study with some colleagues. Dinner is at 6. "Colleagues?" Emma frowned. "On Christmas Eve?" Margaret was already walking away, her heels clicking on the marble foyer. "Important business does not wait for holidays, Emma. You would understand that if you had ever had a career of your own." The words landed like a slap, but Emma had long ago learned not to react. She simply followed Margaret inside, her shoulders tight with the tension she had carried for 8 years. The Hartwell house was decorated like a spread from an interior design magazine. A 12-foot Fraser fir dominated the living room, covered in white lights and silver ornaments. Garlands wrapped the staircase banister. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Everything was perfect, controlled, and completely devoid of warmth. Emma found her daughters in the living room with David's younger brother Charles, who was showing them a magic trick with a coin. Charles was 32, still single, and worked as an attorney at the same firm as David. He had always been polite to Emma, but polite in the way that people are polite to the help. "Hey, Emma," Charles said without looking up. "David should be out soon. He is just finishing up with Victoria." Victoria? The name hit Emma like ice water. Victoria Sinclair was a junior partner at David's firm. Beautiful, ambitious, and according to David, completely professional. Emma had met her once at a firm event and had felt immediately inadequate in her presence. "She is here?" Emma asked carefully. "On Christmas Eve?" Charles finally looked up, and something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like pity. Work stuff. You know how it is. But Emma did not know how it was. What she knew was that her husband was in a closed room with another woman on Christmas Eve, while she stood in his mother's living room trying to pretend everything was fine. She needed air. Emma walked to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dinner, but really to escape. The kitchen staff, yes, Margaret had hired kitchen staff for Christmas, barely acknowledged her presence. She stood by the window, watching the snow fall, and tried to convince herself that the churning in her stomach was just anxiety. Her phone buzzed. "Rosa again. You okay? My spidey senses are tingling." Emma started to type a response, then stopped. What would she even say? That she was standing in her mother-in-law's kitchen, feeling like an intruder in her own marriage? That her husband was in a room with another woman, and she was too afraid to walk in? That she had spent 8 years trying to earn a place in this family, and she still felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome? "I am fine," she typed back. "Just the usual Margaret stuff. Talk later." She put the phone away and took a deep breath. 6 more hours. She just had to get through 6 more hours. She had no idea that in exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes, her husband would hand her divorce papers across the Christmas dinner table. His mistress would announce her pregnancy, and her daughters would watch their mother be escorted out of the house in the snow. But she would soon, because some Christmas gifts come wrapped in paper and ribbon, and some come wrapped in betrayal and lies. Emma Collins was about to receive both. Dinner was set for 6 o'clock, but David did not emerge from his study until 5:45. When he finally appeared in the living room, Victoria Sinclair was beside him. She was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. She looked like she belonged in this house in a way Emma never had. "Everyone," David said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man used to performing for an audience. "I hope you do not mind that I invited Victoria to join us. She does not have family in the area, and no one should be alone on Christmas." Margaret smiled, a real smile, the kind she never gave Emma. "Of course, dear. The more the merrier. Victoria, come sit by me." Emma watched as Victoria glided across the room to take the seat that had been conspicuously empty beside Margaret. The seat directly across from where Emma always sat. The seat with the best view of the Christmas tree and the fireplace. She knows where the good silverware is kept, Emma thought suddenly. She knows which chair is hers. The realization was cold and sharp. This was not the first time Victoria had been in this house. "Mommy," Rose tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Who is that lady?" "She is one of Daddy's coworkers, sweetheart," Emma said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Come on, let us go to the table." The dining room was a masterpiece of holiday excess. The table seated 12. though there were only 8 of them tonight. Crystal glasses, china plates with gold trim, a centerpiece of white roses and evergreen branches that probably cost more than Emma's car payment. Emma took her usual seat at the far end of the table, as far from Margaret as physically possible. The twins sat on either side of her. David took the seat beside his mother, with Victoria on his other side. Charles sat across from Emma, avoiding eye contact. The first course was a butternut squash soup that Emma could not taste. She was too busy watching the way Victoria laughed at David's jokes, the way she touched his arm when she spoke, the way she seemed to know exactly how Margaret liked her wine glass filled. "So, Victoria," Emma said during a lull in conversation, "how long have you been at the firm?" Victoria looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "Almost 3 years now. David was actually my mentor when I started. He taught me everything I know." "I bet he did," Emma thought, but she only smiled. "That is nice. It is good to have support when you are starting out." "Oh, absolutely," Victoria agreed. "David has been incredibly supportive. We have grown very close." The emphasis on close was subtle but unmistakable. Emma felt her stomach drop. The main course was prime rib, cooked perfectly pink in the center. Emma pushed the food around her plate while Margaret held court at the head of the table, discussing the charity gala she was planning for New Year's Eve. "We will need someone to manage the silent auction," Margaret was saying. "Victoria, would you be interested? You have such wonderful taste." "I would be honored," Victoria said warmly. "Thank you for thinking of me." Emma cut a piece of meat she knew she would not eat. 8 years, she thought. 8 years of Christmas dinners, Easter brunches, summer barbecues, and birthday parties, and Margaret had never once asked her to help with anything important. But Victoria gets invited to one dinner, and suddenly she is handling the silent auction. "Mom," Lily whispered, "can I have more potatoes?" "Of course, baby." Emma reached for the serving dish and felt Margaret's eyes on her. "Lily should learn to ask properly," Margaret said. "Children need to understand that there is a right way to do things." "She asked me," Emma replied. Her mother. Margaret's smile was ice. "Of course. I forget sometimes that you have your own way of doing things." The tension at the table was thick enough to cut. Charles cleared his throat and asked David about a case. Victoria laughed at something that was not funny. The twins looked between the adults with the confused awareness of children who know something is wrong but cannot name it. And then Margaret set down her fork. The sound was deliberate, a signal that she was about to speak and everyone would listen. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin and looked directly at Emma. "Well," she said, "I suppose there is no point in delaying any further. David, perhaps now is the time." Emma's blood went cold. Time for what? David did not look at her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the table, past the crystal glasses and the china plates and the perfect white roses, until it stopped directly in front of Emma. "What is this?" Emma asked, though somewhere deep in her gut, she already knew. David finally met her eyes. There was nothing there. No warmth, no guilt, no recognition of the 8 years she had given him. Just the flat, practiced expression of a man who had already moved on. "Emma, so," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emma heard Lily gasp. She heard Rose say, "Mommy?" in a small, frightened voice. She heard Margaret take a satisfied sip of wine and Charles shift uncomfortably in his seat. But all she could see was the envelope in front of her. The envelope that contained the end of her marriage, served to her like just another course at a Christmas dinner. "I have already filed," David continued, reciting words he had clearly rehearsed. "The papers inside outline the settlement and the custody arrangement. I think you will find it fair." "Custody," Emma repeated. The word felt foreign in her mouth. I am seeking full custody of the girls, David said. Given your financial situation and living circumstances, I believe I can provide a more stable environment. My financial situation? Emma heard her voice rising and did not care. I have a financial situation because I put you through law school. I gave up my career to raise our daughters while you built yours. And I am grateful for that, David said smoothly. That is why the settlement includes a generous payout, $50,000 and the Honda. I think that is more than fair. $50,000, 8 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of sacrifice. And he thought $50,000 was fair. You are doing this here, Emma said, looking around the table at the faces that refused to meet her eyes. In front of our children, on Christmas. Children need to understand that sometimes changes are necessary, Margaret said, echoing words she had clearly prepared. This is a valuable life lesson about adapting to new circumstances. Emma stared at her mother-in-law. You planned this. You planned all of this. Now, Emma, Margaret tutted, let us not be dramatic. Dramatic? Emma laughed. A harsh sound that made Lily flinch. You are ambushing me with divorce papers at Christmas dinner, and I am being dramatic? I think, Victoria said, speaking for the first time since the envelope appeared, that everyone should try to stay calm. This is a difficult situation for everyone involved. Emma turned to look at the woman who had been sleeping with her husband. And what exactly is your involvement in this situation, Victoria? Victoria glanced at David. He nodded, a small gesture of permission that made Emma's stomach turn. I am pregnant, Victoria said, 2 months along. David and I are going to raise the baby together. The room spun. Emma gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor herself to something solid. You have been, she started, then stopped. How long? How long has this been going on? Does it matter? David asked. The marriage has been over for a long time, Emma. We have just been going through the motions. You must have felt it too. I felt you pulling away, Emma said, her voice cracking. I thought it was stress. I thought if I just loved you harder, tried harder, gave more of myself, you would come back to me. I did not realize you had already given yourself to someone else. Mommy, Rose whimpered. I am scared. Emma looked at her daughters. Lily's face was pale. Rose was crying. They were watching their family fall apart over prime rib and butternut squash soup. I want to go home, Emma said, standing up. Girls, get your coats. The girls stay here, David said firmly. Excuse me? It is in the custody agreement. He nodded toward the envelope Emma had not opened. Temporary custody is granted to me, pending the final hearing. The girls will live here until the court decides otherwise. Emma felt like she had been punched in the chest. You cannot do that. You cannot just take my children. David reached into his pocket again and pulled out a document. This is the court order, signed by Judge Reynolds this morning. He was kind enough to expedite it given the circumstances. Circumstances? Emma repeated. What circumstances? That is the other thing, Charles said, speaking for the first time in what felt like hours. He pulled out his phone and showed Emma a photograph. Care to explain this? It was a picture of Emma sitting in a coffee shop with a man. The angle was odd, taken from outside, through the window, and the quality was grainy. But it looked intimate. It looked like something it was not. That is my cousin Mark, Emma said, her voice shaking. We had coffee 3 weeks ago. He was in town for business. That is not what it looks like, Margaret said smoothly. And that is not what the court will think when our attorneys present this as evidence of infidelity. Infidelity? Emma's voice rose to nearly a shout. David is the one with a pregnant mistress, and you are accusing me of infidelity? Victoria is not a mistress, David said coldly. She is my partner, my equal. something you never were and never could be. The words hit Emma like physical blows. She looked around the table at the people who were supposed to be her family and saw nothing but strangers, enemies. "Sign the papers," Margaret said, sliding a pen across the table. "Take the $50,000 and walk away quietly. It is more than you deserve, frankly. You brought nothing to this family, and you will leave with more than you came with." "And if I do not sign, then we release the photographs to the press," David said. "The story we tell will not be kind to you, Emma. The gold digger who cheated on her successful husband and lost everything. Is that really how you want to be remembered?" Emma picked up the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Inside were 30 pages of legal documents: divorce petition, custody agreement, property settlement, and at the bottom of each page, a signature line with her name typed beneath it. There was also a yellow post-it note stuck to the first page. In Margaret's precise handwriting, it read, "Sign tonight or face the consequences." Emma looked at her daughters one last time. Lily was holding Rose's hand. Both girls were crying. "Mommy loves you," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I will fix this. I promise I will fix this." Then she turned and walked out of the dining room. She did not sign the papers. She did not take the $50,000. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She simply walked out the front door, into the falling snow, and kept walking until she reached her car. Behind her, she heard Lily screaming, "Mommy, come back." It was the worst sound she had ever heard in her life, and it was only the beginning. Emma did not remember driving home. One moment, she was standing in the Hartwells' driveway, the snow soaking through her dress shoes, and the next, she was parked in her own driveway, with the engine still running and no memory of the miles between. Her phone had 17 missed calls. Rosa, 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 unknown number, Rosa. David, unknown number, Rosa again. She called Rosa back. The phone barely finished its first ring before Rosa answered. "Emma, where are you? I have been calling for an hour. What happened?" "They took my kids," Emma said. The words sounded strange, like they belonged to someone else. "They gave me divorce papers at dinner, and they took my kids." There was a brief silence. Then Rosa said, "I am coming over. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. Do not post anything online. I will be there in 15 minutes. Rosa made it in 12. She arrived with a bottle of wine, a legal pad, and a baseball bat that she propped against Emma's couch. "Why the bat?" Emma asked, her voice hollow. "Emotional support," Rosa said grimly. "And in case that snake of a husband shows up, now tell me everything, from the beginning." "Do not leave anything out," Emma told her. The dinner, the envelope, Victoria's pregnancy announcement, the forged photograph, the custody order, the threats, everything. Rosa took notes, her pen moving furiously across the yellow pad. When Emma finished, Rosa set the pen down and looked at her friend with an expression that was equal parts fury and determination. "Okay," she said. "First things first. That custody order is suspicious as hell. Getting a judge to sign anything on Christmas Eve, let alone a temporary custody order, that does not happen without serious strings being pulled." "Margaret has connections," Emma said flatly. "She has connections everywhere." Rosa nodded. "Second, that photograph of you and your cousin is clearly manufactured evidence. We can prove that is Mark. Phone records, his travel itinerary, witnesses at the coffee shop. They think they're smart, but they're sloppy." "What good does it do?" Emma asked. "They have the girls, they have the money, they have the lawyers. What do I have?" Rosa reached across and took Emma's hand. "You have me, and you have the truth. Courts do not care about feelings, but they care about facts. So tomorrow, We start building a case. Tonight, you rest. Rest, Emma laughed bitterly. My children are sleeping in that house with those people, and you want me to rest. I want you to survive, Rosa said firmly. You are no good to Lily and Rose if you fall apart. So tonight, you cry, you scream, you drink this very mediocre wine because it was all I could afford, and tomorrow, you fight. Emma looked at her friend, at this woman who had been through her own divorce nightmare and come out the other side scarred, but standing. Rosa understood in a way that no one else could. How did you do it? Emma asked quietly. When Marcus took the kids, when everyone believed his lies, how did you keep going? Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My grandmother used to tell me something. She said, Mija, when you are walking through hell, do not stop to take pictures. Just keep walking. Emma smiled despite herself. That is terrible advice for documentation purposes. Rosa laughed. Okay, maybe stop for a few pictures. Evidence is important, but you know what I mean. The only way out is through. And you are going to get through this, Emma. I promise you. They sat together in the dark living room, the Christmas tree lights blinking cheerfully as if the world had not just ended. Emma thought about her daughters, about whether Margaret had let them hang their special ornaments, about whether Victoria was tucking them into bed, about whether they were crying for her right now. I never listened to it, she said suddenly. Listen to what? My dad's voicemail. Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. He left me a voicemail 2 years ago, right before he died. I could not bring myself to listen to it. It was too painful. Rosa looked at her. Maybe you should listen now. Emma stared at the phone icon, at the tiny notification that had been there for 743 days. Her father, Walter, had been a quiet man, an accountant who worked long hours and came home smelling like coffee and calculator ink. He had died of a heart attack at 62, alone in his office, surrounded by other people's financial records. She had not been ready to hear his voice. She was not sure she was ready now. Not tonight, she said. I cannot handle anything else tonight. Rosa nodded and did not push. They finished the wine in silence, and when Emma finally fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, Rosa covered her with a blanket and let herself out, locking the door behind her. Emma dreamed of Christmas trees burning and children crying, and her father's voice saying something she could not quite hear. The next morning, she woke to pounding on her front door. For one wild moment, she thought it was David, coming to say it had all been a mistake, a terrible joke. That he was sorry, and he loved her, and could they please just start over? It was not David, it was her boss, Harold Trent, standing on her porch in a winter coat and looking deeply uncomfortable. Harold, Emma said, pulling her robe tighter around herself. What are you doing here? Can I come in? Harold asked. This is not a conversation for the porch. Emma stepped aside and let him enter. Her mind was racing. Why would her boss come to her house the day after Christmas? Why would he come to her house at all? I do not know how to say this, Harold began, and Emma felt her stomach drop. He looked at the floor, at the walls, at anywhere but her face. We received a complaint yesterday afternoon. A serious complaint. A complaint about what? About you. Harold finally met her eyes. One of our clients has accused you of accessing confidential files without authorization. They are claiming you used your position to gather private information for personal purposes. That is insane, Emma said. I have not accessed anything I was not supposed to. The client provided evidence. Screenshots of file access logs with your credentials. Harold pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. I am sorry, Emma. The firm has to protect itself. We are terminating your employment, effective immediately. Emma stared at the envelope. It was thicker than the one David had given her last night, but felt just as heavy. Who? She asked slowly. Who made the complaint? I cannot disclose that, Harold said. But I think you can probably guess. Of course she could guess. The complaint came from someone at David's firm. One of their clients was one of her clients too. It was elegant, really. David had known she would try to investigate, try to dig up evidence for the divorce proceedings. So he had preemptively struck, destroying her credibility and her income in one surgical move. You know, this is not true, Emma said. You have known me for 6 years, Harold. I have never done anything unethical. Harold sighed. I believe you. Personally. But the partners do not care what I believe. They care about liability. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Your final paycheck is in there, along with information about COBRA coverage. I really am sorry, Emma. If there is anything I can do, you can tell them the truth. Harold looked at her with something like pity. The truth does not matter as much as you think it does. It never has. He left without another word. Emma stood in her living room, holding the envelope, and felt the last pieces of her old life crumbling away. In 48 hours, she had lost her husband, her children, and her job. She had been accused of adultery and theft. She had been thrown out of her in-law's house on Christmas and fired the day after. She had nothing left. And that was when her phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Check the news. Emma opened her browser and typed in her own name. The first result made her knees buckle. Westbrook attorney, files for divorce from unfaithful wife, the headline read. The article was short, but devastating. It painted Emma as a gold digger who had married above her station and then betrayed her successful husband with an unnamed lover. It mentioned her termination, framed as being fired for misconduct. It quoted anonymous sources close to the family who described her as unstable and unfit for motherhood. Margaret, Emma whispered. This has Margaret's fingerprints all over it. They were not just divorcing her, they were destroying her, systematically, methodically, with the precision of people who had done this before. Emma sank onto the couch, the phone still glowing in her hand. She thought about her daughters reading this article someday. She thought about her father, who had always believed she was capable of anything, who had died without knowing what she would become. The voicemail icon caught her eye again. 744 days old now. She pressed play. Her father's voice filled the room, rough from decades of coffee and cigarettes. Warm with the love he had never been good at expressing out loud. Emma, sweetheart, if you are listening to this, I am probably gone, and you are probably in trouble. You always were too trusting, just like me. Emma closed her eyes. I need to tell you something. About Margaret Hartwell, I was her husband Richard's accountant for 15 years. When he died in that accident, the numbers did not add up, baby girl. They never added up. Emma's eyes snapped open. I kept copies. Insurance documents, altered policies, the original death certificate before it was amended. It is all in the storage unit. Locker 247. The code is your birthday. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. I never did anything with it because I was scared. Richard was my friend, and I could not prove anything. And Margaret has powerful friends. But you are braver than me. You always were. Her father's voice cracked slightly. I love you, Emma. Use your gifts. Remember what I taught you. The numbers never lie. The voicemail ended. Emma sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, as the weight of what she had just heard settled over her. Margaret Hartwell had killed her first husband. Emma's father had known. He had hidden the evidence in a storage locker for 15 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. And now Emma had nothing left to lose. She called Rosa. I need you to meet me somewhere, Emma said, and bring bolt cutters. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a depressing grid of orange metal doors and fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. Emma and Rosa arrived at 9 in the morning, when the only other person there was a bored attendant who barely looked up from his phone as they walked past. Locker 247 was at the end of a long hallway, tucked into a corner where the security cameras did not quite reach. Emma punched in her birthday, 061-519-86, and the lock clicked open. The unit was small, maybe 5 feet by 5 feet, and mostly empty. A few cardboard boxes, a filing cabinet that had seen better days, a dusty photo album that made Emma's throat tighten. She ignored the album for now. She would have time to grieve later. Right now, she had work to do. The filing cabinet contained exactly what her father had promised: insurance policies, bank statements, photographs, and at the very bottom, a manila folder marked Hartwell with her father's precise handwriting. Emma opened it on the floor of the storage unit, while Rosa stood guard at the door. The first document was Richard Hartwell's original life insurance policy, $500,000, standard coverage for a man of his wealth. The second document was the amended policy, filed 3 months before Richard's death, $3 million. The beneficiary had been changed from Richard's children, from his first marriage, to Margaret alone. The signatures on both documents were noticeably different. "Someone forged this," Emma said, her voice hushed. "The second signature is not even close to the first." Rosa leaned over her shoulder. "Can you prove that?" Emma pulled out the next set of documents: photographs of Richard's car after the accident, close-ups of the undercarriage. The brake lines, clearly visible, clearly severed. "These are not accident photos," Emma said. "These are evidence photos. My father documented everything." She kept reading. Her father's handwritten notes, cramped and careful, detailed his suspicions. The timeline. The financial irregularities. The way Margaret had pushed for Richard to increase his insurance just months before his death. The mechanic who had worked on Richard's car the day before the accident and then disappeared. At the very bottom of the folder was a death certificate. The original death certificate stamped and signed by the county coroner. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, pending investigation. Beneath it was a second death certificate, filed 2 weeks later. This one listed the cause of death as accidental, no investigation pending. She changed the death certificate, Emma breathed. She had enough influence to change the official record. Rosa grabbed Emma's arm. "Girl, this is not a divorce case anymore. This is a murder case. We need to call the police." "No." Emma shook her head firmly. "If we go to the police now, Margaret will know within the hour. She has connections everywhere. The evidence will disappear, and we will be the ones facing charges." "So what do we do?" Emma stacked the documents carefully, her mind racing. "We do what my father did. We wait. We plan. And when the time is right, we present this evidence somewhere that Margaret cannot bury it." They took everything. Every document, every photograph, every scribbled note. Emma made copies, then copies of the copies. She uploaded files to 3 different cloud storage accounts. She mailed a set to Rosa's sister in California, with instructions not to open it unless something happened to them. By the time they finished, it was nearly dark. "Now what?" Rosa asked as they sat in Emma's kitchen, surrounded by stacks of paper. "Now I need a lawyer," Emma said. "A real one. Someone who is not afraid of the Hartwells." "I know someone," Rosa said slowly. "Her name is Janet Brooks. She handled my divorce when everyone else in town was too scared to touch it, because Marcus had connections. She is expensive, but she is good. I cannot afford expensive. I cannot afford anything. I just lost my job." Rosa smiled grimly. "Then we make her see the bigger picture. A case like this, if we win, It is career-defining. Janet is smart enough to recognize an opportunity. Emma nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about her daughters, about how many days had passed since she had held them, about what lies they were being told right now. "I need to see them," she said. "Lily and Rose, I need to let them know I have not abandoned them. You cannot just show up at the Hartwell house," Rosa warned. "There is a custody order, I know." Emma's jaw tightened. "But there is also a school, and I am still their mother. I am still on the pickup list." Rosa stared at her. "You are going to intercept them at school?" "I am going to hug my children," Emma said. "Whatever it takes." The next morning, Emma parked her car 2 blocks from Westbrook Elementary. She knew the Hartwell driver dropped the girls off at 8:15 every day. She knew they had recess at 10:30. She knew the fence on the west side of the playground had a gap just big enough for 2 small bodies to squeeze through. She also knew she was probably breaking at least 3 laws by being there. At 10:32, the doors opened and children flooded onto the playground. Emma spotted her daughters immediately. Lily was sitting on a bench alone, staring at the ground. Rose was on the swings, kicking her legs mechanically, her face blank. They looked broken. Emma walked along the outside of the fence until she was close to the gap. She crouched down and called softly, "Lily, Rose." Both girls looked up. For a moment, they just stared, as if they could not believe their eyes. Then Rose screamed, "Mommy," and both girls ran toward the fence. They squeezed through the gap and threw themselves into Emma's arms. She held them so tight, she could feel their hearts beating against her chest. "Mommy," Lily sobbed. "Grandma said you left us. She said you did not want to be our mom anymore." "That is not true," Emma said fiercely. "I will always want to be your mom. I will always come for you. No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, I will always come for you." "Why did Daddy make you leave?" Rose asked, her voice small. Emma swallowed the rage that threatened to choke her. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she said carefully. "But nothing is more important to me than you two. Nothing in the whole world." They sat together on the cold ground, the 3 of them tangled up in each other, for exactly 7 minutes. Then a teacher appeared at the playground door, looking around with concern, and Emma knew she had to go. "I have to leave now," she whispered, "but I am going to fix this. I promise you, I am going to fix everything." "When?" Lily asked desperately. "Soon, baby. Very soon." She kissed them both, memorizing the smell of their hair, the feel of their small hands in hers, the sound of their voices. Then she slipped back through the gap in the fence and disappeared before anyone could stop her. That afternoon, she met with Janet Brooks. Janet was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that looked like it had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She listened to Emma's story without interrupting, flipping through the documents Emma had brought, her expression unreadable. When Emma finished, Janet was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know this is not just a custody case anymore, I know. You know that if you pursue this, the Hartwells will destroy you, or try to." "They are already trying," Emma said. "I have nothing left for them to take, except my daughter, and I will burn the whole world down before I let them have my children." Janet smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was real. "I believe you," she said, "and I think we can win, but it is going to get worse before it gets better. You need to be prepared for that." "I am prepared," Emma said. She was not, because the very next morning, she woke up to find David standing in her living room with a police officer and a new court order. "The children told their teacher you came to the school," David said. His voice was almost sympathetic, which made it worse. "The judge agreed that constitutes stalking behavior. The custody arrangement has been amended. You are no longer permitted within 500 feet of the girls. You cannot do this, Emma whispered. It is already done, David said. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I wish it did not have to be this way, Emma. I really do. But you brought this on yourself. The door closed behind him. Emma stood in her empty living room, the restraining order in her hands, and felt herself shatter. She had fought back. She had gathered evidence. She had found a lawyer. She had held her daughters and promised them everything would be okay. And now she could not even see them. The hearing was scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. Emma was not sure if that was ironic or just cruel. Janet had spent 6 weeks building their case. Forensic handwriting analysis proved the signature on the temporary custody agreement was forged. Phone records confirmed that Mark, Emma's cousin, had been in town for business the day of the coffee shop photograph. A digital expert had testified that the custody file access logs implicating Emma had been created retroactively. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was finally on Emma's side. But the truth, as Harold had warned her, did not always matter as much as it should. The courtroom was packed. David sat at the opposite table with his attorney, a shark named Hamilton Gray, who charged $800 an hour and smiled like he was doing you a favor by taking your money. Margaret sat in the gallery behind David, wearing black as if she was already in mourning for Emma's maternal rights. Victoria was notably absent. Your Honor, Janet began, the evidence clearly shows a pattern of deception and manipulation by the respondent and his family. The custody agreement was obtained through fraud. The workplace complaint was manufactured. The photograph was deliberately misleading. My client has been systematically targeted in an effort to strip her of her parental rights and her reputation. Judge Patricia Webb listened with an expression that gave nothing away. She was in her late 50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a reputation for being fair but firm. Emma had looked her up. 20 years on the family court bench, known for prioritizing children's well-being over parental drama. No known connections to the Hartwells. It was the first piece of luck Emma had caught in months. Mr. Gray, Judge Webb said, how does your client respond to these allegations? Hamilton Gray stood with the practiced ease of a man who had done this thousands of times. Your Honor, we have no objection to reconsidering the temporary custody arrangement. Recent developments have made my client reevaluate certain aspects of this case. Emma frowned. What recent developments? David looked uncomfortable. He glanced at his mother, then away. It has come to my client's attention, Gray continued, that certain representations made to the court may have been inaccurate. Specifically, the signature analysis on the custody agreement has revealed inconsistencies that warrant further investigation. Janet leaned over to Emma. They are conceding. I did not expect them to concede. Neither did I, Emma whispered. Something is wrong. Judge Webb looked between the two attorneys. Let me understand. You are withdrawing your custody claim? We are requesting a modification, Gray said smoothly. Joint custody with primary residence alternating on a weekly basis. Both parents would have equal time with the children. Joint custody? Emma's heart lurched. She would get her daughters back. Half the time, but still back. Your Honor, Janet said carefully, we would need to review the specific terms, but my client is open to discussing a joint custody arrangement. Judge Webb nodded. Then I am granting temporary joint custody pending the final divorce proceedings. She banged her gavel. Mrs. Collins will have physical custody beginning this weekend. Emma barely heard the rest. She was too busy crying. After the hearing, she hugged Janet in the hallway. Thank you, she said. I do not know how to thank you. Save the thanks for when we win completely, Janet replied. This is not over. They conceded too easily. I do not like it. I do not care why they conceded, Emma said. I get to see my daughters. That is all that matters. But Janet's warning echoed in her head as she drove to the Hartwell house that Saturday to pick up Lily and Rose. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The girls ran to her car before she even fully stopped. She held them in the driveway, ignoring Margaret, watching from the window, ignoring the cold February wind, ignoring everything except the two small bodies pressed against hers. They went home. They made pancakes for dinner. They watched movies and ate popcorn and fell asleep in a pile on Emma's bed. For 3 weeks, Emma had her daughters half the time. She took them to school. She helped with homework. She braided their hair and read them stories and answered their questions about why Mommy and Daddy were not living together anymore. She almost started to believe it would be okay. The call came on a Tuesday night. Mrs. Collins, this is Detective Morrison with the Westbrook Police Department. You need to come to the station immediately. Emma's blood went cold. What happened? Are my daughters okay? Your daughters are fine, Detective Morrison said, but there has been a serious allegation. I cannot discuss it over the phone. Please come in as soon as possible. Emma called Rosa, who agreed to stay with the girls. Then she drove to the police station with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Detective Morrison was a tired-looking man in his 50s with a wedding ring and coffee stains on his tie. He led Emma to an interrogation room and closed the door. Mrs. Collins, he said heavily, I have to ask you some questions about your relationship with the Hartwell family. What kind of questions? Detective Morrison slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, documents, bank records. We received an anonymous tip this evening, he said, along with evidence suggesting that you have been blackmailing Margaret Hartwell using stolen documents. Blackmailing? Emma's voice came out as a squeak. I have never blackmailed anyone. The evidence suggests otherwise. There are wire transfer records showing payments from Margaret Hartwell to an offshore account. The anonymous tipster claims you set up that account and have been demanding money in exchange for keeping certain information private. That is insane, Emma said. I have never received any money from Margaret. I do not even have an offshore account. Detective Morrison studied her face. The account was opened using your social security number and maiden name. Emma felt the room spin. She set me up, she whispered. Margaret set me up. If that is true, Detective Morrison said, you are going to need to prove it. Because right now, I have evidence of theft, blackmail, and fraud. And I have a warrant for your arrest. Emma's world collapsed for the second time in 3 months. She was handcuffed in the interrogation room. She was photographed and fingerprinted. She was allowed one phone call, which she used to call Janet. They set me up, she said, her voice barely holding together. Margaret created fake bank accounts in my name. She made it look like I was blackmailing her. Janet was silent for a moment. Then she said, Can you prove the accounts are not yours? I do not know, Emma admitted. I do not even know how she did it. I will make some calls, Janet said. Do not say anything to anyone until I get there. Emma sat in a holding cell, still wearing the clothes she had put on that morning to take her daughters to school, and tried to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. 3 weeks. She had been happy for 3 weeks. Now she was facing criminal charges, and her daughters were probably being told right now that their mother was a thief and a blackmailer. She thought about her father's voicemail. The numbers never lie, he had said, but the numbers had lied. Or rather, Margaret had made them lie. Emma closed her eyes and tried to remember everything Janet had taught her about building a case. Evidence, documentation, chain of custody. Margaret was smart. Margaret had resources. Margaret had been doing this for decades, but Emma had something Margaret did not. She had nothing left to lose, and sometimes that was the most dangerous weapon of all. Bail was set at $50,000. Rosa mortgaged her house to pay it. "You cannot do this," Emma said when Rosa told her. "You will lose everything. You did not lose hope when you had every reason to," Rosa replied. "So neither will I." The charges were serious: theft, blackmail, fraud. If convicted, Emma faced up to 15 years in prison. But Janet had been busy. The bank accounts were created using a fake ID, Janet explained, spreading documents across Emma's kitchen table. "The photo on the ID is not you. It is someone who looks vaguely like you, but it is clearly not the same person." The wire transfers were initiated from IP addresses in the Cayman Islands, not Connecticut. "So we can prove I did not do it? We can prove reasonable doubt," Janet said carefully. "But proving you did not do something is harder than proving someone else did. We need to go on offense." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we stop playing defense." Janet pulled out a separate folder. "I have been doing some digging into Margaret Hartwell. Her first husband, Richard, died 20 years ago in a car accident. The insurance payout was $3 million. "I know," Emma said. "My father documented everything. But what you might not know," Janet continued, "is that Richard was planning to divorce Margaret before he died. His attorney at the time was a man named William Chen. William is retired now, but I tracked him down." "What did he say?" "That Richard had already drawn up divorce papers. He was leaving Margaret for another woman. If the divorce had gone through, Margaret would have received almost nothing. But Richard died before he could file." Emma stared at her lawyer. "You think she killed him?" "I think the timing is suspicious," Janet said. "And I think your father thought so too. The question is whether we can prove it." "We have the evidence," Emma said. "The forged insurance documents, the photographs of the brake lines, the amended death certificate. Evidence that has been sitting in a storage locker for 20 years, Janet pointed out. "Margaret's lawyers will argue it is unreliable, possibly fabricated. We need something current." "Like what?" Janet smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Like a confession. You want to get Margaret to confess to murder? I want to get Margaret to incriminate herself in something. Anything. Once we have her on record admitting to any part of this, the whole house of cards comes down." Emma thought about it. "How?" "I have an idea," Janet said, "but you are not going to like it." Emma did not like it, but she did it anyway. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Emma would reach out to Victoria Sinclair, the woman who had destroyed her marriage, and try to turn her into an ally. Victoria was the weak link in the Hartwell operation. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and according to Janet's research, not as committed to David as she appeared. "She is also being controlled by Margaret," Janet said. "I found records of payments from Margaret to Victoria starting 2 years ago. Regular monthly deposits that stopped 3 months ago." "Blackmail?" Emma asked. "Possibly. Or hush money. Either way, Victoria knows something, and right now she is more afraid of Margaret than she is of you. We need to change that." Emma made the call from a burner phone. Victoria answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Victoria, this is Emma. Do not hang up." There was a long pause. "Why should I talk to you?" "Because Margaret is going to destroy you too," Emma said. "You are useful to her right now, but the moment you are not, she will throw you away just like she threw me away. And you have a baby to think about." Another pause. "How do you know about the payments?" "I know about a lot of things," Emma said. "Things that would send Margaret to prison for the rest of her life. I also know that whatever she has on you, whatever she is holding over your head, it is not as bad as what she has done." You can walk away from this clean, Victoria, or you can go down with her. Victoria was silent for so long that Emma thought she had hung up. Then she said, "What do you want?" "I want the truth. Meet me tomorrow. Bring whatever you have. And Victoria, if you tell Margaret about this call, I will make sure the FBI knows exactly who helped her cover up a murder." She hung up before Victoria could respond. Rosa was staring at her. That was ruthless. "I learned from the best," Emma said grimly. The meeting was at a coffee shop in Hartford, far enough from Westbrook that they were unlikely to be recognized. Victoria arrived looking like she had not slept in weeks. Her pregnancy was showing now, a small bump under her expensive coat. They sat across from each other in a corner booth. Emma waited. Finally, Victoria spoke. "Margaret has photographs of me. From before. I worked as an escort in law school. I was 23. I was broke. I was desperate. She found out somehow and has been using it to control me ever since." "Control you how?" "She told me to pursue David. She wanted him to marry someone she could manipulate. Someone who owed her." Victoria's voice cracked. "I did not want to do this, Emma. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But Margaret has this way of making you feel like you have no choice." Emma felt something she did not expect. Pity. "What else do you know?" Victoria pulled out her phone. "I started recording our conversation 6 months ago. Insurance, I guess. In case she ever turned on me." She pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the booth. Tinny through the phone speaker, but unmistakable. "Richard was weak. He was going to leave me with nothing. I did what I had to do, and I will do the same to that Collins girl if she does not disappear." Emma's hands were shaking. "Say that again." Victoria rewound the recording and played it again and again and again. "I did what I had to do. It was not a confession to murder, not exactly, but it was close. Close enough to reopen an investigation. Close enough to create reasonable doubt about Emma's charges. Close enough to change everything." "Why are you doing this now?" Emma asked. "Because I am going to be a mother," Victoria said, and her eyes were wet. "And I do not want my child growing up the way David did, with that woman poisoning everything. I want out, Emma. I will testify to whatever you need. I just want out." Emma looked at this woman who had been her enemy, who had stolen her husband and helped destroy her life, and made a decision. "Okay," she said. "We do this together." They shook hands across the table. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. But it was a start. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal strategy and careful maneuvering. Janet filed a motion to dismiss Emma's charges based on new evidence. The motion included bank records showing the offshore accounts had been accessed from IP addresses linked to the Hartwell estate. It included testimony from the handwriting expert confirming the ID used to open the accounts was forged, and it included Victoria's recording. The prosecutor, faced with evidence that the alleged victim had potentially framed the defendant, agreed to drop the charges pending further investigation. Emma was free. For now. But they were not done. Janet had been working with a contact at the FBI who specialized in financial crimes. The insurance fraud alone was enough to open a federal investigation. Combined with the evidence of the original murder cover-up, Margaret was facing serious legal exposure. The problem was timing. If Margaret knew she was being investigated, she would disappear. She had money stashed all over the world. She could be on a plane to a non-extradition country before anyone could stop her. "We need to move fast," Janet said, "and we need to make sure she does not see it coming." The plan came together on a Sunday afternoon in early March. Emma, Janet, and Victoria sat in Janet's office, surrounded by evidence files and coffee cups. "The Maritime Global Summit is next week," Janet said. It is the biggest shipping industry event of the year. Margaret is scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for her charitable work. Emma felt sick. Charitable work. Built on murder money. Victoria spoke up. She has been talking about it for weeks. She sees it as her coronation. Everyone who matters in the industry will be there. Perfect, Janet said. That is where we expose her. How? Janet pulled up a diagram of the convention center on her laptop. The award ceremony is being broadcast live. Margaret will give an acceptance speech, and during that speech, we present our evidence. On live television? On live television, Janet confirmed, where Margaret cannot bury it, where her lawyers cannot suppress it, where the whole world will see exactly who she really is. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. She will destroy me when she finds out I helped. She is going to destroy you anyway, Emma said. The only question is whether you go down alone or she goes down with you. Victoria nodded slowly. What do I have to do? Janet outlined the plan. Victoria would attend the summit. As Margaret's guest, she would plant a wireless device near the main presentation screen. At the crucial moment, Emma's evidence would play on every screen in the convention center. Meanwhile, FBI agents would be positioned at every exit. The moment the evidence went public, they would arrest Margaret on federal charges. It was risky, it was bold, it was probably illegal in at least 3 different ways. But it was their only shot. The summit was held at the Javits Center in Manhattan. 20,000 people. Live coverage on 3 major business networks. Representatives from every major shipping company in the world. Margaret Hartwell sat in the front row, wearing a white suit and a smile that made Emma's skin crawl. Emma watched from the AV control room, surrounded by monitors and nervous technicians. Janet was on the floor, coordinating with the FBI team. Victoria was in the audience, her hand resting on a small device in her purse. The award ceremony began at 7 p.m. The presenter, an elderly industry titan named Warren Phillips, spent 10 minutes extolling Margaret's virtues, her philanthropy, her business acumen, her dedication to family. Emma wanted to scream. Finally, Margaret took the stage. She looked radiant, triumphant. Thank you all so much, Margaret began, her voice warm and gracious. This award means more to me than I can express. When my husband Richard died 20 years ago, I thought my life was over. Emma's finger hovered over the button. But I found strength in his memory. I found purpose in continuing his legacy. Everything I have built, I built for him now. Emma pressed the button. The screens behind Margaret flickered. Her speech continued on the teleprompter, but the images had changed. The first document appeared, Richard Hartwell's original life insurance policy, $500,000. Then the amended policy, $3 million, the forged signature clearly visible. Then the photographs of the brake lines. Then the original death certificate. Then the recording. Margaret's own voice echoed through the convention center. Richard was weak. He was going to leave me with nothing. I did what I had to do. The audience gasped. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Margaret stood frozen at the podium, her perfect smile crumbling as she watched her entire life unravel on screens the size of billboards. This is lies, she stammered into the microphone. This is fabricated. I am being framed. But the FBI agents were already moving through the crowd. 2 of them climbed the stage. One placed a hand on Margaret's arm. Mrs. Hartwell, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, tampering with a death certificate, and conspiracy to commit murder. Margaret screamed. She actually screamed, a high-pitched sound of rage and disbelief. You cannot do this to me, she shrieked as they handcuffed her. Do you know who I am? I will destroy all of you. The cameras kept rolling. The whole world watched Margaret Hartwell be dragged off the stage in handcuffs, her white suit wrinkled, her perfect hair falling across her face, her empire collapsing around her. Emma watched from the control room, tears streaming down her face. It was over, or so she thought, because 3 hours later, as Emma was driving home from the city, her phone rang. It was Janet, and she sounded worried. "Emma, we have a problem. David just filed an emergency custody motion. He is claiming that your involvement in his mother's arrest proves you are mentally unstable and a danger to the children." "What?" Emma nearly drove off the road. "Margaret just got arrested for murder. How can he use that against me?" "His argument is that you orchestrated a public humiliation rather than going through proper legal channels. That you are vindictive and obsessed and incapable of putting the children first." "That is insane." "I know," Janet said, "but the motion is being heard tomorrow morning." Judge Webb recused herself because of the conflict of interest. The new judge is Thomas Hamilton. Emma's blood went cold. "Hamilton? As in Hamilton Gray, David's lawyer?" "His father." Janet's voice was grim. "We knew they had connections. We did not know they went this deep." "So what do we do?" "We fight," Janet said. "Like we have been fighting. Like we will keep fighting until we win." Emma hung up the phone and pulled over to the side of the road. She sat in her car, in the dark, and tried to process what was happening. She had exposed a murderer. She had gotten justice for a man who died 20 years ago. She had done everything right, and they were still trying to take her children. But Emma was different now. 2 months of fighting had changed her. She was harder, smarter, more ruthless. And she had one more card to play. She pulled out her phone and called Victoria. "I need another favor," she said. The emergency custody hearing was held in a cramped courtroom that smelled like old coffee and desperation. Judge Thomas Hamilton presided, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face like he had never smiled in his life. Emma sat at the defendant's table with Janet. David sat across from them with Hamilton Gray. Victoria was notably absent. The gallery was empty, except for one person, Rosa, sitting in the back row with a notebook and a fierce expression. "Mr. Gray," Judge Hamilton said, "you may proceed with your motion." Hamilton Gray stood, buttoning his expensive jacket. "Your Honor, my client is seeking emergency sole custody of his 2 daughters, Lily and Rose Hartwell, on the grounds that their mother poses an imminent danger to their well-being." The phrase imminent danger made Emma's stomach turn. "As this court is aware," Gray continued, "Mrs. Collins recently orchestrated a public attack on her mother-in-law at a major industry event. Rather than pursuing her grievances through appropriate legal channels, she chose to humiliate and destroy a respected member of this community in front of thousands of people. That respected member is currently in federal custody for murder," Janet interjected. "That is not relevant to this proceeding," Gray said smoothly. "What is relevant is Mrs. Collins' pattern of behavior. She stalked her children at their school. She was arrested for blackmail and fraud. She has demonstrated repeatedly that she prioritizes her vendetta over the well-being of her children." "Those charges were dropped," Janet said. "Dropped is not the same as innocent," Gray countered. "Your Honor, my client is simply asking that his children be protected from a woman who has shown herself to be unstable, vindictive, and dangerous." Judge Hamilton looked at Emma over his glasses. "Mrs. Collins, how do you respond to these allegations?" Emma stood. Her hands were steady. Her voice was clear. "Your Honor, I am not unstable. I am not vindictive. I am a mother who is fighting to protect her children from a family that has proven itself willing to lie, cheat, and apparently even kill to get what they want." She took a breath. "I did not stalk my children. I hugged them for 7 minutes when I had not been allowed to see them for weeks. I was arrested for blackmail, But those charges were dropped because the evidence showed that Margaret Hartwell had set me up. Everything I have done, every action I have taken, has been in response to attacks on me and my family by the Hartwells. Judge Hamilton's expression did not change. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Yes, Your Honor. Janet stood. We have documentation of forged signatures, manufactured evidence, and a coordinated campaign to strip my client of her parental rights. We also have a witness who can testify to the Hartwell family's pattern of manipulation. The courtroom doors opened. Victoria Sinclair walked in, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She looked pale but determined. I would like to call Victoria Sinclair to the stand, Janet said. Objection, Gray said quickly. Miss Sinclair is not on the witness list. Miss Sinclair has information directly relevant to this proceeding, Janet replied. She can testify to conversations she had with David Hartwell and Margaret Hartwell about their plans to take the children from Mrs. Collins. Judge Hamilton considered for a moment. I will allow it. Victoria took the stand. She was sworn in. Janet approached her gently. Miss Sinclair, how long have you been in a relationship with David Hartwell? 2.5 years, Victoria said quietly. And during that time, did you have conversations with David or his mother about David's marriage? Yes, many times. Can you describe those conversations? Victoria looked at David. He would not meet her eyes. Margaret wanted David to divorce Emma from the beginning, Victoria said. She said Emma was a gold digger who was ruining the family name. She said Emma was not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough. She said Emma would never fit in. Victoria's voice wavered, but she continued. When I got pregnant, Margaret saw it as an opportunity. She told David that this was his chance to get rid of Emma for good. She said she would handle everything. She would make sure Emma lost the kids and the money and her reputation. Did she say how? Victoria nodded. She said she had done it before, that she knew how to make people disappear. Gray shot to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay and speculation. It is a direct quote from a witness, Janet countered. A witness who is clearly biased against my client, Gray argued. Judge Hamilton held up a hand. I will allow the testimony. Continue. Janet turned back to Victoria. Is there anything else you want to tell the court? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small device. I recorded more conversations, she said. Not just with Margaret. With David, too. She pressed play. David's voice filled the courtroom. I do not care what it takes. I want Emma gone. I want the kids. Tell Mother to do whatever she has to do. And another recording. The restraining order was genius. She cannot even see them now. By the time this goes to trial, they will hate her. And another. Victoria keeps asking questions. You need to remind her what happens to people who get curious. The courtroom was silent. David had gone pale. Gray looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Judge Hamilton removed his glasses and polished them slowly. Mr. Hartwell, he said, is that your voice on those recordings? David did not answer. Mr. Hartwell, I want to speak with my attorney, David said finally. Judge Hamilton nodded. We will take a 15-minute recess. 15 minutes turned into 3 hours. When court resumed, Hamilton Gray stood up, looking like a man who had just lost a war. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw his emergency custody motion. Judge Hamilton looked at him. Is that so? Yes, Your Honor. In light of new information, Mr. Hartwell has decided that joint custody, as previously arranged, is in the best interest of the children. Emma felt a wave of relief, so strong she had to grip the table to stay upright. Mrs. Collins, Judge Hamilton said, do you have any objection to this arrangement? No, Your Honor, Emma said. Joint custody is acceptable. Then the motion is withdrawn. The previous custody arrangement stands. Judge Hamilton banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. Emma turned to Janet, tears streaming down her face. Is it over? She whispered. Is it finally over? Janet hugged her tightly. It is over. You won. But as Emma looked across the courtroom at David, at his hollow eyes and defeated posture, she did not feel like she had won. She felt like a survivor. There is a difference. Spring came slowly to Westbrook that year. Margaret Hartwell's trial began in April and lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged insurance documents, the tampered death certificate, the recording where she practically admitted to murder. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Emma watched the verdict on television, her daughters curled up beside her on the couch. Mommy, Lily asked, is Grandma Margaret a bad person? Emma thought about how to answer that. Grandma Margaret made some very bad choices, she said finally. And now she has to face the consequences. Is that why we do not see her anymore? Yes, baby. That is why. Rose looked up from her coloring book. What about Daddy? David had not been charged with anything, technically. His mother had orchestrated the fraud. His recordings showed he was aware of some illegal activity, but proving criminal conspiracy was harder than proving murder. He was, however, facing disbarment. The State Bar had opened an ethics investigation based on his involvement in the forged custody documents. His career was over. You will still see Daddy, Emma said. Every other week, just like before. The girls nodded, accepting this with the resilience of children who have been through too much and learned to adapt. Emma wished she could adapt as easily. The weeks after the trial were strange, empty. For months, Emma had been running on adrenaline and fury. Now that the battle was over, she did not know what to do with herself. She got a new job, a legal secretary position at a small family law firm in Hartford. Her boss was a kind woman named Patricia, who had followed Emma's case in the news and wanted to help. You have been through hell, Patricia said during Emma's first week, but you came out the other side. That takes strength. Emma was not sure she agreed. Some days she felt strong, some days she felt like she was barely holding together. Rosa was her lifeline, as always. You know what you need, Rosa said one Saturday afternoon as they sat on Emma's porch, watching the girls play in the yard. You need a win that is not about the Hartwells. You need something that is just about you. Like what? Rosa shrugged. I do not know. Take a class. Go on a date. Get a really ridiculous haircut. Something to remind yourself that you are more than just a survivor. Emma laughed. I am not ready to date. I did not say you had to be ready. I said you should consider it. There is a difference. As if on cue, a car pulled into the driveway. A man got out, carrying a toolbox. That is Michael, Emma said. From the hardware store. He is fixing my kitchen faucet. Rosa raised an eyebrow. The same Michael who let you use his employee discount, even though you do not work there? He was being nice. The same Michael who just happened to have an extra casserole dish when yours broke? It was a coincidence, Rosa snorted. Girl, there are no coincidences. There are only men who are too shy to ask you out directly. Emma watched Michael walk to the front door. He was ordinary looking, with brown hair and kind eyes, and the sort of face that suggested he had never once in his life tried to manipulate anyone. He was the exact opposite of David. Hi, Emma, Michael said. Ready for me to take a look at that faucet? Yes, Emma said. Come on in. He worked on the faucet for an hour. He fixed it without charging her. He played tag with the girls in the backyard while Emma made lemonade. When he left, Rosa was grinning. What? Emma asked. Nothing, Rosa said. innocently. Just observing. Stop observing. Never. That night, after the girls were in bed, Emma sat on the porch and looked at the stars. Her father used to do this. He would sit outside on summer nights, smoking a cigarette he thought nobody knew about, staring at the sky. She pulled out her phone and played his voicemail one more time. I love you, Emma. Use your gifts. Remember what I taught you. The numbers never lie. The numbers never lie. She had thought he meant the financial documents, the evidence that would bring Margaret down. And he had meant that, partly, but maybe he had also meant something else. The numbers of her own life, the balance sheet of gains and losses, the accounting of what mattered and what did not. She had lost her husband, but she had gained her freedom. She had lost her in-laws, but she had gained her self-respect. She had lost years of her life to a family that never wanted her, but she had gained the knowledge that she was stronger than she ever knew. The numbers, when she added them up, came out positive. Thanks, Dad. She whispered to the stars. She could have sworn she heard him whisper back. 1 year later, Christmas Eve, Emma's house was full of people. Rosa and her 3 kids, Janet, who had become a friend as much as a lawyer, Michael, who had asked Emma out 6 months ago and had been making her laugh ever since. The tree was not big, the ornaments were not expensive, but the house was warm and loud and full of love. Mommy, Rose called from the kitchen, the cookies are ready. Coming, baby? Emma walked into the kitchen, where her daughters were covered in flour and wearing matching aprons that said Cookie Monster in training. These look amazing, Emma said, surveying the slightly lopsided Christmas trees and uneven stars. I made this one special, Lily said, holding up a cookie shaped vaguely like a heart. It is for you. Emma felt her eyes sting. Thank you, sweetheart. It is beautiful. Can we eat them now? Rose asked hopefully. After dinner, Emma said, rules are rules. Both girls groaned but did not argue. Later, after dinner and presents and way too many cookies, Emma stood on the porch and watched the snow fall. Michael came out with 2 mugs of cocoa. You okay? He asked. Emma took a sip. Better than okay. You are thinking about last year, he said. It was not a question. Emma nodded. A year ago today, I was standing in Margaret's driveway with nothing. No kids, no job, no hope. And now, she looked through the window at the chaos inside. Rosa was teaching the kids some kind of dance. Janet was arguing with the television. The girls were laughing so hard they could barely stand. Now I have everything. Michael put his arm around her. You built this, he said. All of it. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something beautiful. I had help. Everyone needs help. Accepting it is not weakness. It is wisdom. Emma leaned into him. When did you get so philosophical? I have been watching a lot of self-help videos, Michael admitted. I wanted to be able to keep up with you. She laughed. Her first real, full laugh in what felt like years. The door opened and the girls tumbled out. Mommy, it is snowing. I know, baby. Can we make snow angels? Emma looked at Michael. He shrugged. It is Christmas. They made snow angels. All of them. Even Janet, who complained the whole time about her bad back. Lying in the snow, looking up at the stars, Emma thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the loss, the fighting, the winning. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be here, happy, surrounded by people who loved her, she would not have believed them. But life, she was learning, had a way of surprising you. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emma's blood went cold for a moment. Old habits. But when she opened it, she smiled. It was from Victoria. Merry Christmas, Emma. The baby is here. A boy. I named him Walter, after your father. I hope that is okay. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I am trying to be better. Because of you. Thank you. Below the text was a photo. A tiny baby with dark hair, wrapped in a blue blanket. Walter, Emma typed back. He is beautiful. Merry Christmas, Victoria. She put the phone away and looked at her daughters, who were now trying to bury Michael in snow. Mommy, Lily called. Come help. On my way. Emma got up, brushed the snow from her coat, and joined her family. The past was behind her. The future was uncertain. But right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. And sometimes, that was enough. Now, if you are ready to see how Emma turned her worst Christmas into the Hartwell's last Christmas as a free family, stay with me until the end. I promise you, the final twist will leave you speechless. And hey, if you enjoy stories about justice being served and karma coming to collect, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Emma's situation. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to fight back, share this video with them. Your support means everything to this channel. Now, let us begin. Closing statement. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Remember, the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Never let anyone make you feel small. Your strength is greater than you know. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you of your own battles, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Like this video, if Emma's victory gave you hope. Share it with someone who needs to hear that justice exists. And subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Until next time, stay strong. And never stop fighting for what is yours. Final disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring meaningful value and life lessons to our viewers. Every story we tell is crafted with purpose, designed not just to entertain, but to inspire, empower, and remind you that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a way forward. Thank you for being part of our community.